We welcome you to YBS. Youth Baseball School is rolling out a new initiative, no doubt the brainchild of Kyle and Kevin, getting together and coming up with something that I think will be really special, Monday Mentors. In addition to a beautiful name, I had to go to literature and find out that mentor is really closely tied to wisdom, had to do with old classical mythology and wisdom. And I think that's exactly what it is that we hope to bring to you today, whether you're with us live or whether you're with us somewhere down the line. We want to produce evergreen content. And Kev, when you talk about mentors, I don't know how you choose who you're mentoring, and I don't know how they choose you, but that's going to be embedded in our talks, in the walks we have. What an opportunity to have a few people here live, and then obviously down the road, wherever you're finding this, you can find so much more. The first Monday of every month, Kev, you had this down and planned and visioned, and I don't know if you do a vision board, but you do something where you have it all up in your head, and today we roll it out. So welcome, my man.
Yeah, thanks for doing this with us, JJ, Joey Jet, as I call you, Joe Ferraro. And thank you for everybody who's joining. Yeah, it was really just something that Kyle and I came up, we brainstormed with. I can't take all the credit for it for sure, but we came up with this idea of kind of like, he asked me a simple question of what do you want to do? Like, what do you like to do? And mentoring is something over time that I've kind of grown into. It wasn't something that I was set out to do as a young player, as a young person. I wanted to play in the big leagues like everybody else, and retire at 40 and millions of dollars and go play golf the rest of my life. That didn't happen. And here we are today. And I think what's happened off the field has been much more beneficial, not only to me and my family, but hopefully to many others, just because of the spot that I've come into. So mentoring is a passion of mine, something that I really, many mentors have poured into me, Joe, and I've just tried to return the favor to a few other people. So it's something that's on my heart. It's something that I wake up every day trying to help somebody. That's why I say, how can I help somebody today? It's literally what I say when I wake up. My feet hit the floor every day. So this Monday Mentors is highlighting people that I admire, that we admire as a group, that we look up to and that we learn from. And I'm just excited as everybody here, Joe, to learn, because what a great opportunity. I get to, as you always say, the money guy, this is free. We get to learn from people and get poured into so we can pour into others.
Well, there's no doubt it's who you know in this world. And previously, years ago, when you hear that phrase, you think it's something about connections. But actually, it's really much more about connection with no S. And it's an idea that you get to meet people who can open doors for you, and you better be opening them for other people as well. And with that serious backdrop, I want to just say that I hope knowing you, Kev, and Kyle will get me out of trouble, because it was very recently that I learned of Steve's work. And I think sometimes when someone does such amazing work out there, like you taught me long ago, Kev, we never want to assume anything. But once in a while, you break that rule with me and you say, oh, Joe, you're from Bucks County. You must know Steve's work. And I didn't. And, I'm in a walking in truth here. I didn't know Steve's work until the YBS stuff started coming out. So if I didn't know it living in Bucks County, what an opportunity to shine a light on what is actually happening here in June 2020. Now it makes a lot of sense to me why you start out Monday Mentors with this gentleman, Steve. So why don't you introduce me to your friend and someone that I have admired for a very short time, but man, what an impact he and his team are doing. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. We want to welcome Steve Bandura to our show today. And Steve, I've got to know recently and been so blessed to be able to go through his facility, meet his people. I've known about Steve for a long time, but it's a pretty recent in the last year connection, and use that word, Joe. And Steve, I'm just so happy that you joined us today, and thank you for taking the time out to pour into all of us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here anytime. First thing I want to know is that all you guys have barbers living in your house? How's the hair get? I'm the only one with a hat on here.
I want that noted for the record that he included me in that. So thank you, Steve.
That's the longest Joe's hair has been in a long time, Steve. Okay. So that is
my pleasure to be here, guys. I mean, I think what you're doing with YBS is awesome. It's just such a great resource for kids and for families and for, baseball dads especially have always been kept in the dark, and, just that's looking for something to help their kids, and being told by every product out there that if you don't get this, if you don't do this, your kid's going to fall behind. And, I think what you guys are providing is just so needed. And I commend you guys for that.
Steve, if you would have told me that earlier today, I would be watching a video of Marian Anderson singing opera, singing This Land Is My Land in front of the Lincoln Memorial in 1939, if you would have told me that on a Monday I'd be doing that, I would have called you crazy. And instead I was, as I prepared for this talk. What does Marian Anderson, the opera singer, mean to you in your program?
Well, our recreation center is the Marian Anderson Recreation Center. She grew up 2 blocks from here. She sang at the church. They used to be the church there. All the churches have gentrification has shut down most of the churches. There's nowhere to park, a lot of other issues. But there's a Marian Anderson house where she grew up 2 blocks from here. It's like a little museum. But she was a pioneer. A lot of people don't know that. She's like the Jackie Robinson of opera. She was denied the chance to sing in 1939. She was denied a chance to sing at a concert she was supposed to be at. The Daughters of the American Revolution banned her from it. Eleanor Roosevelt stepped in and arranged this concert on Easter Sunday at the Lincoln Memorial, and it was like hundreds of thousands of people there. It was amazing. She spent a lot of her career in Europe, only because the artists were a lot more accepted in Europe and treated a lot more fairly. But she's definitely a pioneer. If you don't know her work, look her up.
She was denied a chance to sing. I mean, right then and there, we have a poem in one phrase that really runs through the work you're doing. You're making sure that young people of all colors are doing amazing things. Steve, I want to read something to you that Frank Bruni wrote. Amazing writer. I got to know him through food writing, but he went on to write about culture and much more for the New York Times. Frank wrote, "If you were looking last week for a thread of hope amid all the hurt in America and savagery abroad, for something to thrill and something to cheer about, this is where you found it, on a baseball diamond in central Pennsylvania that really did amount to a field of dreams." Frank wrote that in August of 2014, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be every bit as true today. Can you talk a bit about the work that you're doing through baseball to try to solve problems?
Yeah, it's just, I grew up in like Frankfurt and Cottman in Northeast Philadelphia. And at that time, there were 6 boys clubs within walking distance of my house, like sports clubs. They were called boys clubs back then, that I could have played multiple sports for. I mean, the opportunities were just there. And, growing up in that little bubble world there and living in that bubble world until college, I just assumed everybody else had those same opportunities. And if, they weren't taking advantage of it, it's on them. And then in 1989, I was 28, and a friend of mine from college called and said, "Hey, my boss is trying to start this youth organization. He found this rec center near Center City." They were working for like First Pennsylvania Bank. It was in walking distance. And he wants to use this. They have a boxing gym there. It hasn't been used in a long time. Looking for someone to run a boxing program. And I fought for a couple of years in college. So I, as a favor to her, to make her look good in front of her boss, I said, sure, And I was living in Rockledge and working in Willow Grove at the time. So I drove down here and my life just changed. It originally was to start a boxing program, and I did that for a while. And as I went along, I realized there was nothing. There were no team sports available to the kids in this neighborhood. Nothing, not even basketball like everybody assumes. And I just felt like that was just so unfair. And the guy that started it would schedule games against, like a soccer game against a team from the Northeast. And we're talking like 12, 13-year-old kids just started playing soccer, and he would schedule a game against kids up in the Northeast that have been playing since they were 5, and the kids would get destroyed. And the attitude was, "Oh, well, it's just, you're keeping them off the streets, it's good." And I'm like, no, getting hammered every game is not a good thing. So it took some years, and to convince him to start with younger kids. And what had happened was I lost the company I was working for shut down, and I got offered a job in King of Prussia, and I turned it down. I went on unemployment on purpose for a year to see what I could build full time here. And I started off this first we call it the Jackie Robinson Baseball League, our in-house T-ball. And I had went out and got 160 kids to start between the ages of 5 and 8. And 2 years after that, I took the best kids from that T-ball program and formed the Anderson Monarchs. Traveled and we played in the Devlin League. If you guys remember the Devlin League back then, it was the best league around. And it took some doing, but we got into the Devlin League, and from there we just, the program just built. But really, I mean, it's not rocket science. It's the the same model that the suburban programs use, that anyone uses. You start the kids young, you put them against good competition, you give them good training, and see what happens. And my goal was to show that these kids, being the first and only African American team to ever play in the city A leagues in baseball and soccer, my goal was to show that they could compete with the teams in Northeast Philly. Now, I wasn't saying they could win or win a championship, that they could compete. And what we did was, like, we put our teams together at like 7, 8 years old, and we keep the same roster together year round, and they play baseball, basketball, outdoor soccer, and futsal, indoor soccer, together. We don't have separate tryouts. Those kids stay together forever. And what these kids accomplished since that time is just unbelievable. I mean, my 18U team now is probably the most famous of our teams, thanks to the girl. But that team in 2011, the only African-American team, the only inner city team playing in the top soccer league in the city and the top baseball league in the city, this one roster of kids won the City A League championship in baseball, basketball, outdoor soccer, and indoor soccer in the same year. And with 75% of the kids playing up a year. So, I mean, that's just, all we do is open doors, and these kids have charged through it. From that neighborhood group, that we have 13 college baseball players from that group. 9 Division I baseball players came out of that one neighborhood group.
All we do is open doors. I like the modesty there, Steve. You said something earlier that was interesting. You said it's not rocket science. You're right. It's much harder than that. It's more layered. It's more, you find more resistance. Everybody wants to root for a rocket scientist, Steve. Not everybody wanted to root for you and the team that you're working with. And I think you founded, if my research is correct, the program in 1996 or thereabout. Pretty special time in my life. But hit us with some numbers. There's some things that have changed statistically, and there's some things that haven't. What numbers can you kind of root this conversation in terms of the disadvantage that people of color have when it comes to sports and people of disadvantages?
Well, I mean, I feel like, first of all, I did a whole long report that I sent to Bud Selig's diversity committee back in the day when they wouldn't let me participate. I did this report and sent it anyway. The lack of there is no lack of interest on the part of the kids to playing any of these sports. It's just a complete lack of opportunity. And people say, well, then why don't they start the program? Well, I mean, could you go out and start a lacrosse program if you've never played lacrosse? You don't even know the rules, or, baseball was the sport here. In fact, this exact rec center was the epicenter for black baseball in the first half of the 20th century. But once independent play stopped, everyone was on the same level playing field back then. Everyone played on their own. How we learned, we went out and we played every day with our friends. But there were a lot of kids back then. I mean, I'm the tail end of the baby boomer generation. At one point, 40% of the population was under 19 years of age. So there were 1 million kids. But once those kids aged out of the youth sports, there was a huge lull everywhere. It's like in Northeast Philadelphia, our Holy Terror's youth program went from, it dropped by like 75% in 10 years after I was done. So there weren't as many kids around until those baby boomers went and started having their own kids, and they kind of flattened the curve because they had them over time, to use a phrase that's current. But what happened when there were less kids, independent play stopped. Like kids weren't, like we'd go to Lincoln High School every day and play every single day of the summer and play baseball. Kids didn't do that anymore. So what happened were just the travel programs are really what was left, were the opportunity. And there never were travel programs in the inner city neighborhoods. It was all independent play. All right. And so now that there's only travel baseball, there's nowhere for these kids to play. And then as time goes on, the travel programs are like on steroids now with all the showcase teams and this whole pay to play model, and what it costs just to be seen by college coaches is just astronomical when you look at it. And that's where the biggest disadvantage is. No programs for the kids to participate, no quality programs to participate in when they're young. And the programs that do exist, kids will play 10 games a summer against horrible competition, while the kids in the suburbs are playing 60 to 100 games down at Ripken and against, in top-notch leagues. So how can these kids keep up over the long haul? And why would you stay with it if you're put against that competition later and you're getting destroyed? So we put our kids in the Tri-State Elite League right from the start. We take our lumps for the first couple of years. We catch up, and by doing that and by playing, we don't go to Ripken every weekend. We don't have the kind of money to do those things, those tournaments, but we can schedule 4 games a weekend for $120 in umpire fees, because at the younger ages, it's really all that matters, that the kids play and they learn and they get put in those situations. We also do a lot during the week, do a lot of pitching machine. We'll take our 10-year-old team and our 9-year-old team, split them up and play a pitching machine game, and we'll be there for 2 hours and get 12 innings in. And because every ball's being put in play, and the kids are getting a million defensive reps, and they're expecting the ball to be put in play. And it's just a huge learning, platform for them. So there are ways to level the playing field, but financially, we're not there.
Kev, I want to tag you in. You know a lot about Steve's work. Based on what he's said and what you know about his work, what's a question or two that immediately bubbles to the surface that you would love to see Steve open up for coaches?
Well, 2 parts, Steve. And it revolves around my favorite question, is the question of why. Like, why did you start? And then why do you continue after all these years? Why are you continuing to do the work that you're doing, mentoring these young boys and girls, and through multiple sports, in not the easiest of situations? But why did you start? And has your why changed over the years, or are you continuing to have that same why, and why are you still doing it today?
Well, in the beginning, like I said, I started this part of the Monarchs because I just felt like it just wasn't fair, that the kids had no opportunity, just the injustice of that, of not having opportunity to play sports. It was my whole life growing up with sports. So to not have that, it would leave just such a void. And I just felt like it just wasn't fair that these kids didn't have it. For whatever the reason, the programs weren't there. So that was my reason to start it. And as I did it, and again, I found that I loved it. I loved being around the kids. I loved seeing them improve. And as we go on and on and on, and more opportunities are there for them, and they take advantage of these opportunities, the feeling that I have, like I told this to Kevin, and I mean this 100%, I get just as much, if not more, out of it than the kids do, because the feeling you get when you help somebody, you open a door and they take advantage of it and say, hey, that never would have happened if we weren't here. So, that feeling, you just can't match that feeling. You can't buy that feeling. Every time, like when I started here, I was here for a year and I said, this is awesome. I was working marketing back then. I went back to grad school for elementary ed, and I taught middle school for a few years. And then I was offered this rec position, and I picked the rec. I love teaching, but I picked the rec position because I don't like losing the kids after a year. You're just making progress with them in the classroom, and then they turn them over to somebody else. So I get kids from 3 years old and help them get into college and watch them grow. And We've had some really good partners over the years. The opportunities that, because of the kids' successes, you know, we've opened a lot of doors, like with the Interact schools. I mean, last year we had 10 Monarchs on the Springside Chestnut Hill Academy varsity baseball team. I mean, they look like an HBHS. We had more black players in the starting lineup for SCH than the rest of the Interact had on their rosters combined. And we won the league, just to throw that in there too. They won the league outright for the first time in 30 years. But they're all leaders in the classroom. They're leaders on the field. They're doing well academically. They would never have had that opportunity. They would have been wound up in you know, in public schools, which, you know, be honest, aren't the greatest. And those schools don't create the opportunities that these kids get in the private schools.
I know Kev long enough. I know Kev long enough to know he has a follow, but I do want to say first, thank God you did something well for the Chestnut Hill roster, because Kev and I used to do a lot of damage to their team back as a double play combo on middle infield. We are undefeated against Chestnut Hill, but that's a story for another day, and it's about us, and that's not why we're here. So Kev, go with your follow. I could tell.
Yeah, no, just for people outside of Philly, really quick, just unpack like what the Interact is. Like, we know what the Interact is. You're taking kids from the inner city or from less fortunate backgrounds. You're putting them in Chestnut Hill, like any of the others. What's the Interact like? Just to paint really quick a picture for people, like who are you placing them into?
Well, Interact is 6 private schools, like Haverford, Germantown Academy, Springside Chestnut Hill, Penn Charter, Episcopal Academy, and Malvern Prep. So it's a very expensive private school, K through 12 private schools, but through the help of sponsors, donors, and the schools themselves for financial aid, they've made it possible for, you know, they don't get in unless they meet the academic requirements, which are pretty stringent. So, you know, we test all of our kids when they're 8 years old. A lot of them don't test at that level right then, but the ones that do, we work to get in. And the earlier you get the kids in to that environment, the faster they catch up and they can maintain the pace. Wait until high school sometimes is tough. If you come out of 8th grade from an inner city public school and then go to that school, it's tough catching up. You're really behind. But they're the top schools in the areas academically, other than Holy Ghost, of course, is the best. But
Of course.
Kev and I could flash highlight films of a kid or two from every Interact school you mentioned, right? When you talk about
Big
Penn
leaguers.
Charter, Penn Charter, you talk about Mike Samuels and Wisconsin football, and you can go down the list of people we played with. So it is extremely prestigious. Steve, I uncovered a nugget in preparing for this talk. It was interesting, and it might add a little tension to the conversation, but I'm curious to get your perspective, particularly in June of 2020. There was a remark that you probably get more than once from opposing coaches when your teams take the field, where they'll say, "Man, your team is super well behaved."
yeah,
And it's a tricky nugget that I found, because it's on one hand, I gotta believe the coach means well when he says that. He's really talking about class and decorum, but embedded in that line is some more uncomfortable things. So I just wanted to throw that at you and see how you view what you're trying to put on the field from a class standpoint and truly as a class and race standpoint as well.
Yeah, so that's a great question, especially this week. I grew up in Mayfair, so it was Irish Catholic. You know, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting an Irish bar. And I never knew anybody of color. Even high school was 100% white at Father Judge. I went to Father Judge until I got to college. So I spent the first half of my life in that environment, and the second half almost immersed in the Black community. And I've learned a lot about myself, about how I was back then. I was a typical kid from that neighborhood. Everything I knew was just taught to me by the older kids, or it's just hearsay. And so you believe it because they're older, they know, right? You think they know. But what that comment is, when they say your team's so well behaved, what they're really saying is, we were expecting something opposite of that. We see inner city kids, inner city black kids, we're expecting them to be undisciplined, not very good on the field. And that's what that comment is. It's more like, and the guys do mean well, but what they don't know is that they're looking at my kids as the exceptions. And I talk about this all the time. Like, my family members, may have known 10 black folks growing, through their whole lives. And every one of those 10 were opposite of the stereotype. So every one of those 10 were the exception to the rule. So how many exceptions do you have to meet before you start changing your mindset? And that's what, from being here for so long, I realized that was my thinking as well back then. Until I learned that this is not the exception, this is the rule. What you're seeing exception-wise is, what maybe you see on the news, or what you hear from other people in the neighborhoods, the stereotypes, and my guys just refute every single stereotype. We have, like, I was amazed at how many dads got involved when I first started this, because he believed all the stereotypes about inner city kids, dads aren't involved. This 18-year-old team, and we used to practice when they were 8 years old, and we had 8 stations set up. We had a dad in every station, right? And those dads are still involved. And, it's all those stereotypes were just that. They were stereotypes and unfounded. But people go into that, and I think that's what happens with a lot of the police as well. If you grow up in that neighborhood, which a lot of guys that I grew up with became cops in that Northeast Philly, you only know what you think you know. And it's like, if you look, I said this the other day because it just hit me when I was out in my neighborhood, and I saw something that just stood out to me. Like, I'm walking with my wife through the neighborhood just for exercise to get out, and someone's walking this golden retriever, right? And we're like, oh, look how cool the dog is, golden retriever. And then about 5 blocks later, there's a guy with a pit bull coming down the street. So we walk out into the street, who's a pit bull, right? Studies show like pit bull is like one of the friendliest dogs on the planet, right? But the way you perceive that, if you take it's like you're a cop in a neighborhood you don't know, and you see a white teenager and a black teenager, the thought process right off the bat is completely different. And I know, because that was me. I was there, and I know exactly how it feels to think that way. But, without exposure, you never learn that you're wrong, and it's just exposure. You got to stop thinking the people are the exceptions, because they're not. I could go on for a long time on this, but
the pit bull example works well on multiple levels, of course, because, when pit bulls go wrong, it's a lot of time out of environment, and how they're treated, and the lack of opportunities that they're provided for lack of a better way to say it. Long ago, Kev got me obsessed with this idea of 5 minutes. He's often saying it only takes 5 minutes to change someone's life. I think that's incredibly important in the world of mentoring. I've taken it and ran with it to wonder about, what are the first 5 minutes of when you meet someone? What are they like? And maybe you can extrapolate that out a little bit. When someone's interested in joining the Anderson Monarchs, what are the initial conversations like? What pillars do you throw at them? And what is the shared upon agreement, so to speak, if someone's going to go forward with your program?
All right. So we don't, like I said, we don't have tryouts. Like, once they get to 8 years old, we pick that team at 8 years old. We don't bring anybody on, but sometimes guys move away, or like with soccer, we need more guys to fill the roster because you move to a bigger field and things like that. And we will add a kid. If a parent comes to me with a kid, wants them on the team, and I've had tons of them, especially after Little League World Series and all that. Everybody wants their kid to, be on the winning team and that stuff. But that's what I look for. Like, why do you want to join this? You joining this because, you're just looking for the best program for your son to get him to the pros. If that's the case, then you need to go somewhere else, because as soon as you see another program that looks better, you're going to leave to go to that one. Parents have a lot to do with the kids we choose. Not always, but And if it's a tiebreaker on who we're picking for a team, if I think the parents are just going to be, a real pain in the behind, they're not going to buy into what we're doing. If their kid's not playing short and batting third at 9 years old, they're going to complain. They're going to look to pull them. They only want them to play one sport. And we don't always look for just kids that are athletically talented. We just look for good kids that will benefit from the opportunities that we get to provide. And if they win, they win. Like, my 18-year-old team is unbelievable. I'm never going to have a team like that again. I know that. My 10 to 12-year-old, 2 teams in those age groups, we might have maybe 1 or 2 college baseball players from each of those teams down the road, but we'll have 15 high school soccer players, because that group of kids just love soccer more. If I have them indoors doing baseball, I leave for 10 minutes and come back and there's a soccer game going on. Every group is different. Every kid is different. And that's the thing, we just find out what that group is, or that kid, what benefits that group or that kid the most. And that's what we try to do.
Kev, let me go to you and see what's on your mind with Steve and where you want to go next.
Yeah, just take it one step further with that, Steve. Can you maybe give us an example of how you actually do that? Like, you're thrown a group of players, right? You're not hand selecting them. Much like a lot of people are watching this, maybe it's a high school coach, or they can't really recruit, or maybe it's a young team, same age group, 8, 10 years old, 12, just a rec team. We're not talking travel baseball or anything like that. You are getting a group of people together. How's your process? Maybe an example of how you actually get to know them, maybe kind of get to know not even just their athletic ability, but how do you get to know them as a person, young people even, especially when they don't talk? Like, what is your system, or what is your process kind of going through that?
Most of the kids that get picked for our Monarchs team have been in our in-house program for 2 years. At least, so I get to coach them in t-ball, in 4v4 soccer, and in basketball for 2 years. So I'm seeing them 2-3 times a week for two years. So you get to know, and we have events and picnics and award ceremonies and things like that. So you get to meet the families, and you get to know the families well over that time, and you get to know the kids, what drives them. Is the kid really into it? Like, they're only there because the parents brought them. They don't want to be there. They'd rather be home. And you can see all that stuff over that time period. When you just get a group of kids and say, here's the kids you're going like a high school coach gets this group of kids. This is the kids you have. These are the kids you have, and go. It's a lot tougher than my process.
Like, if you were thrown that, if you're a high school guy and you didn't have that process, like, how would you recommend approaching that situation?
I think, like, I used to be, I was really tough on my guys when they're young, really tough, because I just held them to a higher standard, because as unfair as it is, these guys are under the microscope, everywhere we go, and they're representing more than just themselves. So I'm really tough on them, but I made all the mistakes you can make, and I've learned from them. And one of the biggest things is every kid is different. You can't just say, these are the rules and everyone's going to follow them to the letter, or you're going to be benched. You got to try to learn where these kids come from. It's like when I was teaching Catholic school, I was teaching in West Philadelphia, 100% black student body, 100% white faculty. And I would have these discussions with the faculty when they didn't like something about these kids bringing. I would be like, this is what you're talking about is something that's cultural. You need to understand their culture, not the other way around. You don't expect those kids to conform to, your culture when you're in their neighborhood and their school. But it's the same thing with coaching. You try to get to know the kids. Like, I try to talk to kids. I coached high school for 1 year last year. I was assistant coach on SCH last year. And the kids that weren't my guys that I had growing up, I would talk to them, practice every time. I would try to get to know each kid, find out a little something about them, and talk to the head coach, Joe Chical, about, like, well, what's going on with this kid? And he'll say, oh no, his father's, been sick or something like that. And, he's not as focused as he normally is. And you got to learn about the kids personally and where they're coming from and what's shaping their behavior. To me, that's, if you guys watched The Last Dance, I don't think that team does what it does without Phil Jackson. Like, I used to think Phil Jackson was a coattail rider, get the best players and just go along for the ride. But if you watch that series, I mean, how many coaches would have let Dennis Rodman play after he left for a few days and came back?
Twice.
Nobody. But Phil Jackson knows Dennis Rodman. He knows this is the guy, and punishing him is not going to do anything. It's not going to accomplish anything. It's going to make things a lot worse. As long as the other guys are okay with it, and he knows what he's going to get from Rodman in that game. And he got even more than he even expected from Rodman that game he came back. But, as long as the rest of the players are in tune and with what you're doing and why, everybody, you have to empathize with every player. You really need to put yourself in their shoes and realize and try to understand where they're coming from and what drives them. And I think that's the way to get the best out of a kid too. Some kids you can, dress down anytime. You can just stand and chew them out in front of everybody and they're fine. Other kids will, they'll go into a shell for 3 days.
So that Dennis Rodman example becomes the lightning rod example, right? It's everyone saw it. We're on quarantine and everyone saw it, every coach for sure. So now their temptation is to let that be this outlier example. Hey, he was Dennis Rodman. He was zany. He didn't have an ugly significant other that he was seeing at the time. All those things factor in. But there's an example or two that you could probably pull for coaches who are listening at the lower level. In other words, the temptation would be, hey, there's no way you're going to let that fly at the youth level. You even said yourself, you're very tough on them early on. But pluck for us, if you can, a couple examples without getting too specific that you could see coaches essentially making a different set of rules for certain people and it being the right call.
Yeah. Okay. So I had a kid who was late for practice, right, which is a no-no. He's late for practice. He sits the first few innings of the next game. He'll learn. Next practice, he's late. I bench him again. Next practice, he's late. He's benched again. I'm like, he's going to learn eventually. Finally, another relative had brought him to the game and came up to me afterwards and say, look, I know why you're doing it, but I just need to tell you, to say Joe, I know Joe's late, but his brother is bringing him to the games. His brother doesn't get off work at a certain time. His brother has to take the bus home, pick him up, and get him back on the bus to get to the field. And it's just not enough time. And I felt like the biggest heel after I learned this. I have a kid who was angry at practice and snapping on other kids in practice. And this kid's playing in an ACC school now. And I would ride him about it and I would get on him and I'd pull him aside, this and that. And I find out later the kid's being bullied at his school. I mean, mercilessly at a school. And later we got him into one of the Interact private schools and it just completely changed his life. But I had no idea that this was going on, and he wasn't saying anything because he was kind of ashamed of it. And he was a big kid. He's a big kid, but getting bullied because he wasn't perceived as that tough kid. And it just snowballed from there, and he was having a horrible time. And then we worked to get him into a better school and a better learning environment.
So, Steve, what's the mechanism or question that unlocks that piece of communication?
You got to dig deeper. Like looking back, I did not. Like I went at him angry. I put him on the defensive right away. The way I went him because the way he was acting. I should have pulled him aside or I got him after practice and sat down with him and just let him talk and listen and let him tell me what the issue is. And I didn't give him a chance to do that.
Well, that's worth the visit today to the Zoom all by itself, that lesson. I appreciate that. Terry in the chat wants to know about kind of a pendulum swinging. Do you think, besides the obvious and getting our major league players back whatever way we can safely, when, how do you see getting back to that unrestricted, it doesn't have to be travel ball, have some fun, other options, play wiffle ball? Do you see that? Do you see a time when that swings back? Are you hopeful? Do you have some strategies and ideas?
Are you talking about independent play where you go outside with the neighborhood kids and you play wire ball or stick ball or step ball? No,
Yes. Terry wants to know ages 8 to 12, that range where it's so tender and perfect.
they'll only do it if you force them to do it. Like I said, like I made our kids play stick ball or half ball one time. I taught them half ball. Like they were hanging out in the rec center, and this is what you're doing now, and we go out and we start, and they loved it. They never heard of half ball, and they loved it. But no one ever taught them that game. Now, why do we play those games when we grew up? Because the older kids played it, and we kind of jumped in, and then the younger kids came behind us, and they followed what we did. If there's no one to show you that, you're not going to play. But I just feel like everything has swung so far to the structured, environment. Has to be on a groomed field with coaches and paid coaches and trainers. And, I don't know. I mean, especially with as good as these video games are now, I don't know if you're going to get kids outside, honestly. I mean, they're playing MLB The Show with 10 of their friends at the same time. It's going to be tough. Like, they're telling me, oh, get out of the house, And I blame, honestly, we complained, like my generation will complain about that. Oh, when we used to go like 8:00 in the morning. We were over at Lincoln High School every day, and we'd be there till, we'd come home, grab something for lunch, go back. We come back for dinner. We're back outside again. We're in the driveway. We're playing, until it got dark. But we would go out on our own. We'd be going all day. And then we're the same people later on that turn around and won't let their kids go around the corner without an escort. I mean, we're complaining about us and not even realizing it. I mean, we act like things are so much more dangerous now. They're not. I mean, it's just like, I love Will Smith's quote. He said, racism isn't getting worse. It's just getting filmed, And that's, there's so much information out there, like, oh, this kid was, kidnapped, and, that happened back then, so we just didn't hear about it, I mean, no bike helmets, none of,
Yeah, Kevin and I, we couldn't watch an episode of Different Strokes in the 80s without having nightmares for 3 weeks about kidnapping. I don't think it's worse now. One more for me, and then I'll ping it back to Kev. Steve, what about something we can control? I go to my daughter's soccer practices before all this went down, and it was incredible. I mean, they're doing the ball drills, and there's motion, and games are named after bacon, and things are just incredible for young kids. And I don't always see that at the youth level. So real tangible question for people. What do we do to, I don't want to say beat soccer, but let's learn from soccer and sports like that. What are we missing?
The fun. It's fun. I mean, so in soccer now, in youth soccer, almost every single coach is paid now at the better soccer clubs. All the coaches are paid. So now they're paid. Their job is in their minds, is to train these kids and get them to the next level. And the truth of it is, you have an elite suburban soccer team. All the best players go to this elite team, which destroys the other neighborhood teams, which is a whole nother issue, especially in baseball. But how many of those, you go 10 years later, you take a look at that elite team that's specializing in soccer, and it's work 4 days a week. And like one kid from that team is playing in college. Like, why did we do all that? It's the same thing with the Union Academy and all these pro academy. They don't let the kids play high school. You're not allowed to play for your high school anymore. So now all the better high schools aren't bringing these kids in and giving them financial aid or scholarships. Because why would I do that if you're not going to play for our team? And then, 1 or 2 wind up playing at the next level. And it just feels like you wasted that kid's high school experience. It just, I don't know. It just doesn't seem right to me. If they all made it to the next level, fine, but they're not. And, you know, my 18-year-old group is a perfect example of every one of them played multiple sports in high school, right? Monet, for example, 3 sports in high school. Never even thought about giving up a sport or specializing. And then she had her choice of 2 sports to play in college. And she decided to play softball because it was more fun. And that's what I feel like they're taking out of the game, you know. And I'm guilty of it too. You know, I feel like sometimes I'm gonna be like, I don't want to waste a minute. But when I went to do those pitching machine games where I just feed the machine and they play, I saw how much fun the kids have doing it. And they learn more from that than they do in a lot of our structured practices. So it's, you know, I've made every mistake there is to make. And I just try to learn from those mistakes. So if anybody, you know, anybody in a similar situation or just starting out has any questions, you can contact me anytime. I mean, you guys can give out my email, my cell number, whatever. I'd be happy to save you the mistakes and headaches that I endured, you know, from just not knowing.
Well, I appreciate that, Steve. Yeah, this is why we started this, and you were the perfect first guest on here because of your humility and obviously your experience. And I think all of us on this call have experienced that too. If I would have gone back 20 years ago and looked at how I was giving a baseball lesson, a hitting lesson, I shake my head right now and say, man, like what an idiot. You know, sorry if I had that kid's phone number, still I would call him and apologize. You know, 20 years later, learned a lot. Hopefully the next 10, 20 years later, I'll be able to continue to learn and get better than what we are today. Real quick, Steve, I have 2 last things here before we wrap this up. One, you talked about Monet Davis. The Monet is who you're talking about. You guys went to the Little League World Series. You mentioned that a little bit before. And for some of our higher level coaches, I want to use that Little League World Series platform experience to maybe help some of the coaches that are in those high pressured situations, but all still trying to mentor and grow and love and support and lead through those times. Share with us maybe a couple experiences, maybe just one that really stands out from that time in Williamsport when you guys were in the Little League World Series, high stakes, ESPN, thousands and thousands of fans, packed to the gills. There was no sledding on the hills when you guys played, mainly I'm sure because of Monet, but extract maybe one example that help our coaches and leaders watching this and the mentors.
Okay, I mean, and this is going to go back to my last point, because if you go to those kids that played in that, we were, you know, 30, 40,000 people there going crazy. They're all cheering for you because you're the local team. And all that publicity, all that, you know, that environment. If you asked my guys what was the highlight of that summer, every single one of them will tell you Cooperstown tournament. 3 weeks before we started Little League, or 2 weeks before we started Little League tournament, we played in Cooperstown, All-Star Village. And we had 2 spectators there. Jolly Hendricks' parents were the only 2 spectators we had there. And we wound up losing in the semifinals, in the most crushing defeat ever in their playing careers against a team, Mizuno, in extra innings, this mercenary team from California. It was an amazing game. We wound up losing that, and it was the most crushing, like tears. Normally our guys just, you know, from day one, you know, you win with class, you lose with class. We won the RBI World Series in Cincinnati in 2017. And the umpire came up to me and said, "Coach, do you guys know they just won?" Because it wasn't no dog pile. It wasn't any of that thing. You know, they learned to lose with class, and like they don't get too low when they lose, and they don't get too high when they win. And that's got to be taught. That's got to be taught. So, you know, yeah, you won, but there's still 1,000 teams out there across the country that would whoop your behinds if we played them tomorrow. You know, you won this or you lost. There's always somebody better. It's not, you know, they've learned to do that. And I said, you know, we always say like the losses, especially those big ones, make you better than the wins. if you're winning every game, you're not learning how to, you don't know how to lose. And you see that with coaches too. You can tell the coach that wins all the time, you can tell his character in a game when he's losing or he's in danger of losing, and see how he acts then. But anyway, that every single one of those kids like that Cooperstown experience more than the Little League World Series with 40,000 people and 5 million watching on TV, because it was fun, it was intense, it was just fun, and it was just a fun week together in the barracks.
Steve, I'm beginning to see where you lean with bat flips. I see your tendency here.
Bat flips?
Yeah, after the home run.
I think bat flips are great.
Oh, okay. You surprised me a little bit there.
I think any kind of personality you can put in our game now. I mean, there's too many old boomers, telling you how to play this game. Let the kids decide how the game's supposed to be played. You know what I mean? Like, you can, all the other stuff, I'm a big proponent of small ball and things like that. I mean, depending on what kind of team you have, and every kid on my team has to be able to bunt into a bucket, first or third base side, that kind of thing. It's got to be there when we need it. But as far as how you feel when you hit a home run, and I'm not for showing up the other team big time, but I just think the bat flips just add. And it's not like if every other team in the country is playing that old structured way and unwritten rules, and one team's doing it, yes. But if all the kids feel that way, and they, to me, that's fine. I mean, we need personality in the game to draw more kids to the game.
Speaking of personality, I wish we had more time to get into some of Kevin's antics on the field. Usually was defensive celebration. We won't go there right now, but I do want to open it up to questions. Juan has a dynamite question in the chat. Juan, if you want, you can speak and get your voice heard, or we could just read it from the chat. That goes for everyone. This is an opportunity to bend Steve's ear for a few minutes here live, and then for people that'll be listening. So Juan, I'll be quiet for a second, and we'll go from there. So, all right, perfect. He wants to know what can you do to keep your players from getting poached by travel teams, those scholarships that just maybe are not called scholarship. And I guess he's talking about retention, and how can we keep our athletes in the program we work so hard to create?
Yeah, it's happened to us. It's happened, like, two of the kids from this 18-year-old group wound up going to, looking for the greener grass, and it's not the kids as much as the parents. Like, they're like, oh, look at that team. They're all-star mega elite showcase team, and they won this tournament last year, perfect game, so-and-so, and it's tough, because as parents, like I said, that's why your platform is so important, to teach the things that parents don't know. Because as a parent, you're like, oh, I don't want to cheat my kid. If this is going to help them play in college, then this is what I want to do. And it happened, and it turns out now that the kids that stayed wound up in better situations, college situations, and better match situations than that. But the reason why almost every one of my kids has been approached for that with, well, I get it, the Monarchs are this band of brothers, but you got to think about your future. You got to go here. And and the best story is we went to a perfect game tournament, some Mid-Atlantic perfect game tournament a couple of years ago, and on the field against us is one of the kids that left, and he was on like his third or fourth mega elite showcase team, because he wasn't batting third and playing short everywhere, so you got to take him to this team and then to this team, and the thing that I felt sad. I really felt sad, because after all that, here we were in the same exact place, right? Here we were in the same exact place, and this kid has no friends on that team he's on. I had a conversation last year with one of the local D1 schools here. We were at their camp, and I was sitting with the head coach and saying, like, look across there. Like, these kids don't even know each other. They're paying probably $3,000 to $5,000 for the summer. And my runner on second base is relaying the catcher's sign to the hitter every pitch. because this kid's paying $5,000 to play on this elite team. And not only does he doesn't know why he doesn't know not to single sign with a runner on second. He doesn't know why, and they're spending all this money and they're falling for all this hype, and you wind up not having fun. And yeah, if you maybe get to a college, but that team is probably not there. I mean, there's some really good programs out there that really take care of their kids and invest in their kids. But there are a lot that, they need the kids, they need the money to survive and keep these coaches paid and keep their facility running or whatever. And, the kids wind up at a school that's not a fit for them. Oh, we got him to this college. Yeah, but that personality, that coach and the personality of this kid are not going to mesh. And then that kid now he's at a JUCO. And then he's trying to get back to another D1. And then he winds up in another place. And, then his college experience turns out to be just like his travel ball experience. Hopping from one to another, chasing something, and never making any friends, and losing the whole experience. And it just was so sad because we were in Richmond. Now I remember that, because after the game, there were 11 cars on the other team leaving 11 separate directions with their parents. And we were in our van and we went out to dinner in Richmond and walked around the town, and we stayed together in the same hotel and traveled back home to Philly together in the van. And it's just, that kid could have been a part of that. And we did a barnstorming tour in 2015. I don't know if we have time to touch on that, but in 2013, in 2015, it was right after everything that happened in Ferguson and Baltimore, and our guys were 13 years old, and I felt like they were old enough to handle this and learn, and they needed to learn what that was about. So we got together every Friday night at the rec center with the families, and we studied the civil rights movement. Well, we started from slavery and all the way up to modern day, because if you don't understand the whole entire history, you can't understand what fuels those fires in Ferguson and Baltimore and Minneapolis. You can't understand it if you can't just start, Martin Luther King forward. No, you can't understand Martin Luther King and what the struggle was then unless you understood what created that all the way up into that point. So we studied for 6 months every Friday night, and each week a different family would bring food for everybody, and it was awesome. Then we went out on our 1947 bus, and we went 4,500 miles, 21 cities in 23 days, all through the Deep South, visiting all these places and meeting people that we saw on all the documentaries and we read about in books and we saw in movies. Like Congressman John Lewis was unbelievable. It was like, that was the highlight for all our kids. It was like, to them, after learning all this and then meeting him, it was like meeting, a rock star. And they learned all of this as a team. And that kid didn't get a chance to go on that trip because they're chasing something that, is that they think they're going to get.
True story. My current screensaver is a picture of that Monarchs bus. I saw that picture. I posted on Instagram earlier. It's a gorgeous, and it's a gorgeous idea, the barnstorming idea. In our closing minutes, Terry wants to know who is or was your biggest mentor in baseball or life, Steve?
Well, my dad, for sure, is number one. He passed away in 2008, like a month before the Phillies won the World Series. But no, he was my biggest. He was the quiet leader. He didn't say anything. He just led by example. And, all those years of watching that and not even know that it's affecting you, it's like the canyon, the river at the bottom of the canyon. At one point that water was up here, and as it wore away, gradual, you don't even see it, and then all of a sudden you have this canyon, and that's the way, that's the way he was for me. And I always think back to the lessons I learned there from him. Some of the things I didn't even know, I think, oh my God, that's what my dad did, or that's what my dad said, or but
any questions from the 10 of us remaining? Now's a good time to unmute your mic before we close out.
I got a quick comment, Steve. I just want to thank you for being a wonderful ambassador for the game of baseball. I mean, the stories and the things you've shared today are really tremendous. And you know, as somebody that's still in the game, I hope that you and people like yourself can help our players throughout youth sports, getting into middle school, high school, college, pro ball, whatever else, to continue to bond players together with this great game. So not really a question, but I just wanted to thank you because this is really cool. You doing this.
Thank you, Travis. I appreciate that.
Well, that brings us to last call. Kev, any parting words you'd like to throw out before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I just thank you, Steve, for sharing. Like Chappie was saying, thank you so much for just coming on here and sharing from your heart. Obviously, your passion is you shared with us just a fraction of your journey. There's so many layers to it. We could be here for years and still not get all the way. But I think you showed and you let us off with this Monday Mentors in the only way possible that I could ever think of is you're leading by example and you're planting seeds along the way. And you don't know when those seeds will sprout. But I think the whole gist of this for the mentor and for me as well is, and for all of us, is if you're a true mentor, you're leading from behind. You're not leading from front. And you're leading from behind and you're just basically sprinkling the seeds and planting the seeds along the way. And you're staying in the background in the shadows and you're leading something far greater than yourself. And for, you know, I always talk about playing a long game. And you're playing a long game with these kids. And you're setting the foundation, not to play in the big leagues like Chappie did. You're talking about laying the foundation for life. And however, you know, your son's going to Princeton, and no matter they go to Princeton or they go to the big leagues or they never play past age 13, what you're doing is instilling lifelong lessons and you're allowing them to experience that. So I think you are the perfect guy to start us off because we're using baseball in this case as a platform in order to teach life lessons from. And you've taught so many. You're still teaching so many life lessons. You taught them to me. You taught them to me again, and all of us today. And I really thank you for doing that, Steve.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. Again. It's my pleasure. I mean, just on that point, I wanted to mention this earlier when we were talking about starting baseball and it hasn't been part of the culture. I have 15, 18, I haven't counted them lately, kids whose parents I coached in T-ball. So these are parents that would never have played baseball. And if we didn't have this program, give them the opportunity. And now they're coming back with their kids and enrolling them in the program and start and you know, their kids are going to play too. So, you know, it just this is a great game, and it can just go so far beyond the game and life lessons and things like that. And you know, it just shows that if the opportunity is there, every kid should have the opportunity to experience it and play it. And when you do give that opportunity, this is how it pays off. It's like an inverted pyramid, you know. And but yeah, so I love this game, and I think everybody should have a chance to play it.
Yeah, it's obvious that you do, Steve. We appreciate it. It was great to meet you here live on air. The website is andersonmonarchs.com, and as a bonus, it's a gorgeous website. The kind of Cairn University type graphic design that you could really appreciate. It's a simple, clean look, like that shirt. It is. It's actually a great read. I have to say that you guys did a great job on that. Which obviously storytelling, you know, could be a part 2 where storytelling of the Monarch brand, so to speak, would be really something to highlight. But for Youth Baseball School, for Kyle, for Kevin, and of course for Steve, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and anyone who is seeing this in non-real time, pass it on. And we look to do this the first Monday of every month. This has been Monday Mentors.